This is Lesson 6, Departure Procedures. Now, every flight begins with a departure. It should come as no surprise to you that prior to operating an aircraft in controlled airspace under IFR, you must have filed an IFR flight plan and received appropriate ATC clearance. In this lesson, we'll cover what you need to know to properly file this flight plan. It's not difficult and can all be done prior to starting the airplane for flight. With us in the studio today is Ross Neer. Now, Ross is going to help provide some insight on this lesson on departure. Ross, welcome to the Test Prep Studio.
Hey, thank you, Matt. I'm glad to be here.
Appreciate it. Now, don't mistake Ross's quiet demeanor for being anything other than accomplished and consummate aviator. Not only is he a current, up-to-date Part 91 corporate pilot, he's also earned his medal as an air traffic controller while serving his country overseas in the U.S. Air Force. So he understands and appreciates both the pilot's perspective and the controller's point of view. In addition to his commercial pilot rating, Ross is a skilled CFII with more than 3,000 hours under his belt. But wait, there is more. When he's not flying the Astrojet, he's a team member of dedicated aviation professionals in the development, support, and strategic marketing of electronic flight bag solutions for pilots. These EFBs provide cockpit organization, electronic charts, in-cockpit weather, and situational awareness to pilots flying everything from large jets to GA pilots flying beach bonanzas. These EFBs are manufactured by Stenbach and Everson Incorporated under the Flight Prep Chart Case brand. Ross, welcome once again, and thank you for your service to our country.
Hey, thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Now, let's tap into your knowledge here. You've got a lot to talk about on departure. You've been on both sides of the fence. You've been a controller. You're currently a pilot and instructor. What advice do you have to offer the instrument-rated pilot preparing for a departure?
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of things that I would have to tell an instrument-rated pilot, but I'd say let's reduce everything that a pilot would be scared of to be instrument-rated. And the first thing that you need to be would be prepared, is know where you want to fly, know how you want to fly there, and don't be scared to use the instrument system because it's there to help you as a pilot safely and efficiently get to where you need to go.
Good. So
be prepared to use it and ask your CFI, ask a controller, ask someone else any questions you have about IFR.
Very good. We'll cover these topics: flight planning, clearance requirements, ATC clearances, departure or DP, services, responsibilities, lighting and signs, and VFR on top. With us in the studio now is Josh Pruzek. Josh will be covering a number of lessons for us. Josh, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
A little about Josh's background. It includes extensive flight instruction, charter operation, and ground instruction in the virtual test prep video courses. Now, you'll recognize Josh's engaging, fast-paced, but thorough approach as he covers each lesson. Now, Josh has more than 2,500 hours and holds a commercial pilot multi-engine CFII rating. He's a graduate of the University of Wisconsin and regularly flies a Pitts Special. Since he loves to fly aerobatic airplanes, he has no problem flying upside down, in VFR conditions, of course. Josh, once again, welcome to the Test Prep Studio.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, let's start our Lesson 6 with the first topic: flight planning.
Instrument flight is all about precision, flying headings, altitude, and airspeed at the right time and place. Now, there are 3 phases to every flight. The aircraft leaves an airport, the aircraft travels from point A to point B, and the aircraft returns to an airport. Now, in flying terminology, these phases are departure, en route, and approach arrival. The first topic in this lesson is flight planning. To operate under IFR, you must first file an IFR flight plan. This flight plan gives ATC the information they need to manage your flight. This information includes your type of aircraft and call sign, type of equipment, departure, route and destination, fuel on board, and airspeed. Remember flight plans from your days as a VFR pilot? IFR flight plans are similar but more detailed and specific. To avoid any delays, your IFR flight plan must be filed at least 30 minutes prior to departure. And ATC can hold your clearance 90 minutes from your proposed departure time if need be. However, if you do not begin your flight and activate your clearance in that time period, you must file again. Now, it's best to file an IFR flight plan on the ground before you depart. However, you can also file an IFR flight plan en route if the weather is deteriorating.
Good afternoon, Seattle Center, Bonanza 169 Gulf Romeo 1300. We're VFR, we're maneuvering to do a practice approach back into the ILS 431 here down in Salem, and request any traffic advisories and just an initial vector so we can get our way back over there, sir.
Bonanza 169 Gulf Romeo, Seattle Center, squawk 6616.
All right, squawk 6616, 169 Gulf Romeo.
169 Gulf Romeo, radar contact 3 miles west, Salem Airport, say altitude.
All right, 2,200 for 9er Gulf Romeo, sir.
Now, do you ever find yourself filing a flight plan while you're airborne? I mean, is that...
In the corporate jet, we never file while we're actually airborne. We'll pick up an IFR flight plan when we're actually on the ground. The only time we'd ever do anything of actually starting an IFR flight plan in the air, and many pilots may have to do this, is either you're out of radio range and you can't actually talk to who would need to give you that flight plan. Of course, you can call them on a cell phone, or you can do something else and get a clearance, and you have to be off the ground in a certain amount of time. Otherwise, the clearance is void. But that's the only time that we've ever picked up IFR when you're already flying, that having to go through and, you know, check each box and give all of that information to pick up an IFR flight plan when you're already flying, that's something that you could do that would have a very good chance of slowing you down and possibly putting you behind the airplane and everything else that's going on.
While it is important to file IFR if needed while airborne, it is not really recommended. ATC may be too busy to handle your request as quickly as you need for safe flight. It's always better to file before takeoff so ATC can work you smoothly into the system and not be surprised when you pop up en route. Now, since IFR flight plans are so important, we'll look closely at one here. Here's the flight plan form. In Block 1, you can choose the type of flight plan. You see that right here. You can choose IFR, or you can elect to file a composite VFR and IFR flight plan. In this scenario, it's illustrating the advantage. Suppose you take off from a VFR airport inland from a coast, knowing it's sunny and clear, but you plan to land at a coastal airport with a thick marine overcast. In this case, by filing VFR and IFR in Box 1, you can take off and get to altitude, then enter the IFR system while you're airborne en route. Just be sure to activate the IFR portion of the flight with ATC while you're still in VFR conditions. Block 3 on the flight plan is important. It notifies ATC about the capabilities of your aircraft indicated under special equipment, such as G if your aircraft is equipped with a GPS. Block 7 shows your altitude. This is for your initial altitude, so ATC knows how to place you into the IFR system. Now, you may get approval later from ATC for a higher altitude en route. Block 8 is for your intended route of flight. There you will list all intersections, federal airways, nav aids, and airports defining your route. Now, ATC is also interested in knowing what departure plan or intersection will define your initial entry waypoint. Without a GPS, you must define all the waypoints describing your route, but with a GPS, you can file direct. For example, if you fly from Los Angeles to Denver, your flight plan might be LAX direct Denver, like we see right here. What a wonderfully short flight plan, but flying direct is not always best. Looking at this chart showing the terrain between Los Angeles and Denver, those Rocky Mountains are very high. If you don't have a plane that can fly over them with ease, you will have to select a non-direct route around the higher mountains, even if you use a GPS. Now, Block 12 on the flight plan is for your fuel on board, and you list it in hours and minutes. Precision is important in IFR fuel management. you must always allow enough fuel to reach your intended destination and still fly 45 minutes beyond the destination at normal cruise speed. If an alternate airport is required, you must allow enough fuel to reach your intended destination and your alternate and still fly for 45 minutes at cruise speed. Now, Block 13 is for any listed alternate. My favorite way to remember if you need an alternate is as easy as 1, 2, 3. If either 1 hour before or 1 hour after your intended arrival at your destination airport, the ceiling is forecast to be less than 2,000 feet or the visibility is forecast to be less than 3 miles, then you must file an alternate airport. This provides a weather margin just in case the weather deteriorates below minimums at your airport of intended landing. What type of airport makes a good alternate? When bad weather prevents you from landing at your first choice airport, you certainly want to select an alternate where the weather will be better. You may want to select an alternate inland from the coast to avoid a marine layer, or perhaps one with lower minimums and a precision approach. You certainly want to choose one with a control tower and a bright approach light landing system if there's one available. Now, standard alternate minimums apply when using an airport as an alternate. These are weather minimums in terms of ceiling and visibility at the time you are making your approach. For precision approaches, such as an airport with an ILS, the minimums are 602, meaning a 600-foot ceiling and 2 miles visibility. For a non-precision approach, such as a VOR approach to an airport, the minimums are higher at 802, meaning an 800-foot ceiling and 2 miles visibility. Now, not all possible alternates have standard minimums. This is important to know, as an airport that might seem acceptable as an alternate might not be acceptable when you examine it closely. Approach plates have a small triangle symbol showing a capital A when non-standard minimum requirements apply. As an example, airports with high terrain nearby may use a higher alternate minimum to guarantee terrain clearance under all possible conditions. Also, sometimes you will see a capital A next to the triangular symbol, meaning the alternate minimums are not approved. Can you file an alternate airport that does not have an instrument approach? Yes, you can, but the approach must be forecast to be VFR at your estimated time of arrival. There are 3 important characteristics to consider when selecting an alternate airport. First, your selected alternate needs to be in a different geographical location, so the weather that prevented you from landing at your desired destination is less likely to impact your alternate destination. Secondly, your alternate needs to have a precision approach or a lower non-precision approach. And third, your alternate needs to have a control tower and a bright approach light landing system. After all, you want all the advantages possible when you are arriving to land at your alternate.
How do you go about selecting an alternate?
Well, when looking at an alternate, really, it's another memory jogger that pilots can use when flying IFR, that finding an alternate can be as simple as 1, 2, 3. And if the destination airport that you're planning on flying to within 1 hour before of when you're planning on arriving and 1 hour after when you're planning on arriving has less than 2,000 foot ceilings and less than 3 miles visibility, you have to file an alternate. Yeah. And now parts of what you do to actually plan that alternate, you'd have to go in and familiarize yourself with the actual area. So filing an alternate that maybe is only 10 miles away from the airport that you're initially trying to fly to may not be a good idea. The same weather pattern that is impacting your initial planned destination airport could very well be affected by that same weather. So you need to look at the TAFs and also look at the city forecast nearby, and if it's forecasting for the alternate the same thing that it is for your initial destination, you probably want to look at something maybe a little bit farther away. That for flying into, say, the Portland area here, we'll usually plan as an alternate flying to Seattle. That takes us out of the actual Portland area, takes us out of the weather patterns that will probably affect all of the airports here in the Portland area, and then ensure that in our planning process that we've planned for fuel and we've planned for everything else to get us safely to that alternate and allow us to land there with hopefully a different weather pattern in that area. That when you're finally picking that alternate, there's a few other things that you need to go ahead and look at. That you need to make sure that if you're planning a precision approach, so an ILS, into that alternate airport, you need to make sure that you have at least 600 feet forecast visibility, forecast ceiling, and 2 miles visibility. Now, if you're flying into an airport that does not have a precision approach, you need to ensure that that airport has 800-foot ceilings and the same 2-mile visibility. And beyond that, say in a mountainous area or a very busy traffic area, there may be additional requirements that a pilot will need to absolutely meet depending on what that approach is. That, say, flying into Aspen, Colorado, or flying into a very, very busy airport, there may be specific minima to use that approach in that airport as an alternate that exceed the 8 and 2 and 602 ruling already. Now, if the approach that you're going to shoot does not have anything specified as for you cannot use this for filing as an alternate unless you meet these specifics, then you actually meet that 8 and 2 and 6 and 2. And you're going to be able to look that up on the actual approach plates for that airport.
Now it's time for our next topic, clearances. Before we explore clearances and separations, let's learn clearance requirement basics. Your clearance is a communication between ATC and you, the pilot. You state routing and conditions you want on your flight plan, and they position you to operate in the system. If they can't, they will issue a clearance as close to your request as possible. Your job is to read back and accept the clearance or question the clearance until it is acceptable.
And Portland clearance delivery, Bonanza 169 Golf Romeo, holding short 17 Aurora.
Bonanza 169 Golf Romeo, Portland. Did you want to go Newburgh, Victor 287 for training, or did you just want to get to Salem the quickest way possible?
It's for training. It's actually a video shoot today that we're doing for a ground school course. So yeah, if we could do to Newburgh, then before we get to Newburgh, if possible, do a vector down towards 287.
Bonanza 9 Golf Romeo, I have your request. It's going to be a couple minutes. I do have aircraft in and approaching to McMinnville.
Roger, we'll go ahead and hold for 169 Golf Romeo, sir.
Bonanza 9 Golf Romeo, hold for release. Expect about a 5-minute departure delay.
Roger, 5 mics, 9 Golf Romeo. Left turn towards the battleground, then we'll come back on course via vectors for 9 Golf Romeo, is that correct?
November 9 Golf Romeo, that's the best I can offer you if you want to get off right now. I can left turn off runway 17 to battleground, and then radar vectors on your course.
Roger, that would be just fine for 9 Golf Romeo, sir.
November 9 Golf Romeo, you're released via battleground, report airborne 126.20.
Roger, we're released, and we'll report airborne 12610 for 9 Golf Romeo.
Once you accept your original or modified clearance, ATC expects that you will fly it exactly. If you must deviate from any ATC clearance or instruction, you must notify ATC of the deviation as soon as possible. There is an interesting variance to this requirement. The assumption is that you are operating in IMC or instrument meteorological conditions. But what if you are operating VFR and ATC issues a clearance, potentially causing a violation? Now in this case, the pilot advises ATC of the conflict and obtains a revised clearance.
November 52371, squawk 0110, maintain VFR. It's going to be a bit before I can give you an IFR clearance.
Okay, let's move on to clearances and separation. Before transitioning from visual conditions to IMC, you must receive a clearance from ATC. The reason you must have a clearance is simple. A clearance provides separation between you and other traffic and obstacles. You know you need a clearance to fly IFR, but what requirements apply? The acronym covers the standard clearance format and stands for clearance limit, route, altitude, frequency, and transponder code.
We're going to call up and get our clearance, our IFR clearance down to Salem Airport here in Oregon. And we're going to call Portland clearance delivery at 119er 9er 5. And good morning, Portland clearance delivery. Bonanza 169 Golf Romeo at Aurora here on the ground. I'd like to pick up our clearance to Salem.
Bonanza 169 Golf Romeo, Portland approach, good morning. Clear to the Salem Airport via Newburgh, Victor 287 as filed. Climb and maintain 4,000. Expect 5,000 5 minutes after departure. Departure frequency 126.0. Squawk 4636. Hold on the ground for release.
All right, 169 Golf Romeo copies cleared to Salem via Newburgh, Victor 287 and is filed. Climb maintain 4,000, expect 5,000 5 minutes after departure, 126 even for departure, 4636 for a squawk, 169 Golf Romeo.
Bonanza 169 Golf Romeo, reacts correct. What's going to be your departing runway and how long before you're ready to go?
It'll be about 7 to 10 minutes on the departure, and it looks like we're going to be taking off 17 here at Aurora today.
Bonanza 9 Golf Romeo, roger. Continue to hold. Call me at the hold short when you're number 1 ready to go.
Roger, so you want me to call you on this, or 126 even for 9 Golf Romeo?
Bonanza 9 Golf Romeo, try this frequency.
When I fly IFR, I draw a column for each of these on scratch paper and write any new changes in the column below the older segment. This works well for tracking changes. If you need to refer to an earlier frequency, it's already in the column, and when you return along the same route, you already have a listing of the frequencies and some of the route segments used for your return trip. Let's take one of these at a time. The clearance limit is sometimes issued to your destination airport or to an intermediate location like an intersection. The clearance limit will be stated like this. Piper 1234, you're cleared to, and then the next words will be the controller saying your clearance limit, an intersection, nav aid, or your destination airport. If the clearance limit is not the final destination, be sure it provides an EFC, or expect further clearance time, permitting the flight to continue beyond the fixed limit at a designated release time in the future. In your clearance column, just note the 3 letters of the intersection, nav aid, or airport. Now let's look at the clearance route. The route reflects the route you put initially on your flight plan, or it may reflect any changes ATC made to get you to your destination while allowing for flow control in the system. You also want to double check and make sure that all segments of the route issued to you work given the capabilities of your aircraft. For example, you should never accept a route change with an MEA so high as to exceed the altitude limits of your aircraft. For routing, the controller might say, via the Battleground 270-degree radial to Victor 285 Hobbs intersection. For this route clearance, you would write BTG 270 Victor 285 Hobbs in the route section column. Now the A in craft stands for clearance altitude. The altitude will always reflect your initial altitude. You can request a higher altitude later after you reach your stated altitude if you choose. The controller might say, climb to and maintain 7,000 feet. So in your altitude column, you draw a bent arrow, angled and then flat with a 7 next to it for 7,000 feet. Now, it's very important that you never accept a clearance exceeding the limits of your aircraft, or you will not be able to comply with the clearance assigned by the controller. Now the F stands for frequency. The departure frequency sometimes is given with the tower frequency at a large, busy airport. Let's look at the scenario. A frequency issued in a clearance might be like this. Contact departure 127.905, tower 119.3, and you would write 127.95 in your frequency column. And if you have the radio memory capability, you could queue up 127.905 so that you can toggle it with your radio to contact the tower first at 119.3, followed afterwards by contacting departure. The T stands for transponder. At the end of the clearance, ATC assigns you an initial transponder code. Besides writing it down, you want to make sure that you enter it into your transponder so it is ready for use when you are cleared for takeoff. ATC says at the end of the clearance, squawk 4371, and you would then write down 4371 in your transponder column, and then you would enter 4371 into your transponder, setting the transponder to standby so it is ready in the first few moments after your IFR release to be turned on. When you request your clearance, be ready to write or copy your clearance on paper, then read it back to the controller the same way it was issued to you, using the column technique and reading across the columns. Remember, clearance, routing, altitudes, frequencies, and transponder settings. You are not required to read back the entire clearance verbatim, only the parts containing altitude assignments, vectors, or any parts requiring verification. Remember, copy your clearance, then read it back the same way it was issued. Once you accept a correct clearance, you must fly the clearance as assigned. If you deviate from the clearance, you must request a clearance change and approval. For routes with few revisions, ATC provides an abbreviated clearance. It will always contain the DP or departure procedure, the name, the number, and transition. Now on uncontrolled fields, you want to use a void time. You should contact ATC by phone and file your flight plan. ATC will then issue you a clearance void if not activated by time, and then they will state a time. If the flight cannot depart prior to the void time, you must notify ATC as soon as possible, but within 30 minutes.
Okay, let's take time for a couple more review questions. What response is expected when ATC issues an IFR clearance to pilots of airborne aircraft? What response is expected, A, B, or C? Your correct answer here is B. Pilots of airborne aircraft should read back those parts of ATC clearances and instructions containing altitude assignments or vectors as a means of mutual verification. The readback of the numbers serves as a double check between pilots and controllers and reduces the kinds of communication errors that occur when a number is either misheard or is incorrect. Okay, your answer there again, B. Next question. Cruise 4,000 feet clearance would mean that the pilot is authorized to which of these? Correct answer, A. A cruise clearance is used in an ATC clearance to authorize a pilot to conduct flight at any altitude from the minimum IFR altitude up to and including the altitude specified in the clearance. The pilot may level off at any intermediate altitude within this block of airspace. Climb descent within the block is to be made at the discretion of the pilot. However, once the pilot starts descent and verbally reports leaving an altitude in the block, he or she may not return to that altitude without additional ATC clearance. All right, there you have it. Let's tackle yet another topic in this lesson. This time out, departures. Back to your classroom.
In this topic, we'll study departures. IFR departures vary widely. In fact, while not recommended, it is possible and allowable to depart in 0-0 conditions, in which case the departure airport would not be suitable for an alternate. So now let's take a look at departures, which you'll commonly see abbreviated as DP. The shorthand for departure procedure is DP, and it simplifies ATC procedures, and they're most often found at busy, larger airports. DPs provide routing to get you over rugged terrain. They often contain a climb gradient, so you must be certain your aircraft can climb at or above the climb gradient when you accept the DP. You need to have a textual description to use a DP. Now, typically, this is in your approach plates, but if it's not, you can simply ask the controller to read it to you. And after you copy it, you will then have a textual description for your use in the cockpit. Now, if you do not want to fly a DP, you can enter no DP in your flight plan. If you enter no DP in the flight plan, the controller will read you a set of departure instructions that will get you onto your IFR flight plan successfully. Let's take a look at an actual DP. This is the NAT DP at Medford, Oregon. Now you can see right over here that there is a requirement for a climb rate of 400 feet per nautical mile up to 4,100 feet in order to provide obstacle clearance. Now, since your vertical speed indicator shows feet per minute and you need feet per nautical mile, you must use a conversion chart. Now, there will be a conversion chart provided with the FAA test questions. This is an instrument takeoff procedure conversion chart that you can see right here. This chart converts feet per minute into feet per nautical mile, and it's based on ground speed. Now, if our ground speed is 120 knots and our required climb rate is 400 feet per nautical mile, we can see that these two columns intersect right here at 800 feet per minute. Now, if you have this scenario with a strong headwind, decreasing your ground speed to 90 knots, you will only be able to use 600 feet per minute to achieve the same climb gradient of 400 feet per nautical mile. This example shows why ground speed varying with the wind can play a critical role in achieving the appropriate climb gradient on a DP.
Do you ever decide not to use a SID or STAR?
Well, SIDs and STARs are there to route traffic in quickly most of the time. That if we can get a SID or a STAR that really helps us out on our route, meaning a more direct route into the airport we're planning on going into, that's great. Now, if we're on say a departure procedure that takes us way out and far away from where we initially planned on going in the first place, then what you're going to see is that, yeah, we'd love to go direct instead of having to fly the entire departure. And again, that's simply asking ATC if you can do it. That if you ask to see if you can get direct to some location that gets you out and on your way, the worst they can say is no. So go in there, ask for it, and also on your arrival, the worst they can say is no. That if it's something that will help you reduce cockpit workload, or something that will get you to where you need to go faster, more safely as well, then ask for it. See if ATC will give it to you that day.
Okay, welcome back to the studio. Let's look at another review question. We're going to ask you to refer to a figure in just a moment, a series of figures. Using an average ground speed of 120 knots, what minimum rate of climb must be maintained to meet the required climb rate, feet per nautical mile, to 4,100 feet, as specified on the instrument departure procedure? Which of these three is correct? Well, let's take a look at our figure here. Now let's zoom into this little area. Note the SID requires a minimum climb rate of 400 feet per nautical mile to 4,100 feet for obstacle clearance. So we have a set of procedures here that we can arrive at our formula. Refer to the figure as we did using the FAA Legend 16. Enter the table in the required rate of climb column. Our third step is that number is 400 feet per nautical mile. Moving across the row to the right, we intercept the 120 knot ground speed column and read 800 feet per minute. Now we can use this formula, ground speed times climb rate required divided by 60 equals the rate of climb. Putting numbers in that formula, we get our ground speed of 120 knots times 400 feet nautical miles divided by 60 gives us our answer of 800 feet per minute. But we have a table provided by the FAA. Here's the table. And we can zoom in a little on that. We find our ground speed of 120 knots. We go over to the left column, find our required climb rate of 400. The intersection of that is 800 feet per minute. We go back to our question and answer, the answer being C, 400 feet per nautical mile, which requires at least 800 feet per minute. That's your answer, C. All right, let's tackle another topic. Moving along to services, we invite you to get back with your instructor and cover services.
Next, let's study the services available to pilots. The IFR pilot may rely on a number of ATC and Flight Watch services. These range from clearance delivery, en route navigation, and weather reports. One advantage at many tower-controlled airports is that the tower can offer terminal radar service to provide separation for participating VFR and IFR aircraft. IFR pilots receive this service automatically, and VFR pilots have the choice of using it. Since using it provides extra safety, it is highly recommended whether you are operating VFR or IFR. Airport Advisory Service, or AAS, is provided by flight service stations on airports without operating control towers, or at airports where the tower is closed part of the time. You can get AAS to issue wind and pattern advisories and information about any traffic in the pattern. Now, another service offered is traffic information advisories. Controllers will issue traffic advisories by referencing them to a 12-hour clock, with the 12 being directly in front of you in your aircraft. Now, the traffic advisories are based on radar position and do not take into account any heading correction to account for a wind. Here's an example of an important advisory from ATC. Cessna 1234, traffic 12 o'clock. 3 miles. This advisory warns the pilot that a plane might be coming right at you in the 12 o'clock position. Now, if you see the traffic, you would respond, Cessna 1234, traffic in sight. If you don't see the traffic, you would simply say, Cessna 1234, looking for traffic. There are 2 terms you need to know about services to pilots. The first is resume own navigation, and it means that the pilot resumes their own navigational responsibility. It is usually issued after a radar vector ends, when radar contact is lost, or when the pilot requests to terminate ATC services. Radar contact is another term. This means ATC identifies the aircraft on the radar display, and radar flight following will be provided until radar identification is terminated.
Good afternoon, Seattle Center, Bonanza 169, Gulf Romeo 1300. We're VFR.
169 Golf Romeo, radar contact 3 miles west, Salem Airport, say altitude.
Roger, 2,200 for Niner Gulf Romeo, sir.
We have a single review question for you on services. If a control tower and an FSS are located on the same airport, which function is provided by the FSS during those periods when the tower is closed? Which of A, B, or C is true? Your correct answer is C. Airport Advisory Service, or AAS, is a service provided by an FSS physically located on an airport which does not have a control tower or where the tower is temporarily closed or operated on a part-time basis. Okay, let's move along. New topic, and this time it's responsibilities. Back to your classroom and your instructor.
It's time to study pilot and controller responsibilities. While the pilot is ultimately responsible and the final authority for the flight, he does not have to do all of this on his own. The pilot and controller share certain responsibilities. When each party meets their shared responsibilities, the flight is more enjoyable and safer. For ATC to provide aircraft separation, they need radar contact for positive aircraft identification, and they must also be able to receive your transponder code. Radar services terminated means they have lost the transponder and can no longer provide separation, or that you are outside the airspace boundary. When ATC advises resume own navigation, it means you have full and complete responsibility for all navigation. A pilot in command is also responsible for complying with speed adjustments when requested by ATC, and ATC cannot issue a VFR clearance on an IFR flight plan unless requested or if it is necessary to comply with noise abatement.
Let's review this question under responsibilities. What responsibility does the pilot in command of an IFR flight assume upon entering VFR conditions? What responsibility does he assume? Your answer is C. When meteorological conditions permit, regardless of type of flight plan or whether or not under control of a radar facility, the pilot is responsible to see and avoid other traffic, terrain, or obstacles. Answer C. Okay, new topic. Lighting and signs. Back to the classroom.
Let's review lighting and signs. Just like traffic signs and lights provide vital information when driving a car to ensure the smooth flow and safety of traffic, so must the pilot understand the signs and lights to safely navigate on the surface and near the airport. A VASI is usually found on the side of a runway. These light systems are visible 3 to 5 miles away during the day and 20 miles or more at night. It helps the pilot by guiding the descent for landing. However, they should not be used unless the approaching aircraft is visually aligned with the runway centerline. A series of colored lights may change throughout your descent. When the aircraft is aligned, these light systems guarantee safe obstruction clearance within 10 degrees of the extended runway centerline for a distance up to 4 nautical miles from the runway threshold. Note, the size in the examples has been slightly exaggerated. The 2-bar VASI is the most common VASI system, and the approaching pilot sees a red, white row of lights from each line of the VASI. These light rows are set at a specific angle, such that if the approaching aircraft is too low, the pilot sees red lights, and if too high, only white lights. These 2 lines of lights are spread some distance apart. and they're located near the side of the runway, and the middle zone between them is the ideal touchdown spot on the runway. The lower angle on each row of lights shines red, and the higher angle on each row of lights shines white. If the approaching pilot is too high, both light rows show white. When an approaching pilot is flying a perfect glide slope, the near row of lights shines white, indicating too high, and the far row of lights shines red, indicating too low. This combination of red over white tells the pilot that they are all right, or on the correct glide path. On this path, the aircraft will touch down in the ideal zone of the runway between the near and far rows of VASI lights. If an approaching pilot is too low, both light rows will shine red, indicating that the pilot is too low and must take immediate corrective action to get back on the red over white, you're all right approach path. Here's the cockpit view of a proper glide path as it appears to the landing pilot. The top bar is red and the bottom is white, and if the pilot stays on this path, the aircraft will touch down between the two bars. If the pilot strays high or low, the lights will give an immediate indication. Now, here's the cockpit view when the aircraft is too low on the approach. The top bar is red and the bottom bar is red as well. If the pilot stays on this path, the plane will touch down short of the runway, possibly even before reaching the hard landing surface. Finally, here's the cockpit view when the aircraft is too high on the approach. The top bar is white and the bottom bar is white as well. If the pilot stays on this path, the plane will touch down long, far enough down the runway to potentially cause an overrun. Now, another less common VASI system is the tricolored VASI. This system uses one projecting unit with three separate colors, like you see right here. When the aircraft is too high, the single light source is amber. When the aircraft is on the correct glide path, the single light source is green. And when the aircraft is too low, the light source is red. Here's the cockpit view when the aircraft is too high on the approach. The single light source is amber. If the pilot stays on this path, the plane will touch down past the normal landing spot. Now here's the cockpit view when the aircraft is just right on the proper approach. The single light source is green. If the pilot stays on this path, then the plane will touch down neither short nor long, but just right. Finally, here's the cockpit view when the aircraft is too low on the approach. Notice the single light source is red. If the pilot stays on this path, the plane will touch down long, potentially far enough down the runway to cause an overrun. Now, you might run across a pulsating VASI like you see right here. The pulsating VASI only uses red and white lights, but sometimes it pulses. And when the aircraft is too high, the single light will pulsate white on and off like you see right here. When the aircraft is on the correct glide path, the single light will remain a steady white. And finally, when the aircraft is too low, the single pulsating light alternates between red and white. Let's take a look at the cockpit view when the aircraft is too high. The single light source pulsates white and continues to pulsate white as long as the aircraft remains too high on the approach. Now here's the cockpit view when the aircraft is aligned on the glide path. The single light source is a steady white. If the pilot stays on this path, the plane will follow the proper glide path all the way to touchdown. Finally, here's the cockpit view when the aircraft is too low on the approach. The single light source pulsates white and red. If the pilot stays on this path and sees this indication, then they must add power to climb back to the proper glide path. More common is the PAPI, or the Precision Approach Path Indicator. Now, the PAPI uses red and white lights through 4 angled lenses like you see in this unit right here. When the aircraft is far too high, all the lights will be white. When the aircraft is slightly high, 1 light will turn red and 3 will remain white. Now, when the aircraft is on the proper glide slope, 2 lights are white and 2 lights are red. And when the aircraft is slightly low, 3 lights are red and 1 is white. And finally, when the aircraft is too low and needs to climb or add power to get back to the proper glide slope, all 4 PAPI lights will turn red. Here's the cockpit view when the aircraft is too high, which is considered at or above 3.5 degrees from the horizon. The 4 white lights are pretty hard to miss. Seeing this would call for the start of an increased descent rate back to the proper glide slope. Next, here's the cockpit view when the aircraft is slightly high or around 3.2 degrees. This extra positive indication, partially between high and on glide slope, is why this is considered a precision approach indicator. Then here's the cockpit view when the aircraft is right on the glide path at about 3 degrees. 2 reassuring white lights and 2 reassuring red lights indicate to you that you are right on glide path. Next, here's the cockpit view when the aircraft is slightly low. The 3 red lights and the 1 white light are an indication that you are 2.8 degrees low and need to correct your descent. And finally, here's the cockpit view when the aircraft is very low. The 4 red lights are impossible to ignore. When you see 4 red lights, you are lower than 2.8 degrees and you must add power immediately. Signage and markings also play an important role. Mandatory instruction signs use white letters and red backgrounds like you see right here. They're used to show entrances to runways, critical areas, and prohibited areas. Location signs use yellow letters on black backgrounds like we see right here. These tell the pilot a specific location, such as a taxiway or runway location. Taxiways are indicated with a letter such as T for Tango, while runway location signs use a number to complement the magnetic information displayed on a heading indicator. Direction signs reverse the yellow and black by using black letters and directional arrows on a yellow background like this sign that we see here. The arrow leads the pilot. Destination signs then combine direction information with a destination. These signs also have a yellow background with black letters or a number indicating a destination on the airport. These signs always have an arrow showing the direction of the taxiing route to the destination. When the arrow on the destination sign indicates a turn, the sign is located prior to the intersection. Destinations commonly shown on these types of signs include runways, aprons, terminals, and military areas. Information signs also have yellow backgrounds with black letters or numbers. Information signs provide pilots with information on areas that cannot be seen from the control tower, applicable radio frequencies, and noise abatement procedures, as just a few examples. Now, the airport operator determines the need, size, and location of these signs. Runway distance remaining signs use white numbers on black backgrounds and indicate the remaining landing runway available in thousands of feet. If you see a 3, that means 3,000 feet are remaining, down to 1, which means you only have 1,000 feet of runway remaining. Signs are not the only visual indicators communicating to pilots at the airport. Surface markings painted directly on the taxiways and runways are also used, and signs are also painted on taxiways and runways to reinforce other signage. The most common painted markings are taxiway centerline and edge lines, which are yellow and solid or dashed. When the taxiway leads to a runway intersection, you will encounter hold lines, which are double yellow lines crossing the taxiway path, and you can see some of those right here. These hold lines have double dashed lines on the other side, indicating planes coming through may cross without having to receive a clearance. Now, a good way to remember these lines is if they are broken dashes, you can flow through them, but if they are solid, you must stop and receive a clearance. At night, there is also lighting involved. Now, some lighting is pilot controlled and activated from the cockpit when the pilot pushes the push-to-talk button on the microphone. These runway lights are on a timer and typically stay on for about 15 minutes after being activated. Here we show how pilot-activated lighting works. In this first example, the pilot keys the microphone 7 times and the lights come on at high intensity. You can see it makes quite a difference when you're searching for an airport at night. Now, if the pilot keyed the mic 5 times, as in this second example, the lighting would still come on, but only at medium intensity. Finally, if the pilot keyed the mic only 3 times, the lighting would come on, but at a very low setting. Other nighttime lighting includes airport rotating beacons. Civilian airports will use rotating beacons that alternate green and white, green and white. You can see an example shown right here. Military airports, on the other hand, add an extra white flash so the pattern looks like this, with a green followed by a white and then another white flash, and then it repeats. And if you ever see a rotating beacon on during daylight hours at the airport, that is the clear sign that the airport is below VFR minimums and that you will either have to wait before flying in VFR conditions or file and use an IFR flight plan.
And we have a review question for you about lighting and signs. Which approach and landing objective is assured when the pilot remains on the proper glide path of the VASI? A, B, or C? Your answer is B. The VASI is a system of lights arranged to provide visual descent guidance information during the approach to a runway. These lights are visible from 3 to 5 miles during the day and up to 20 miles or more at night. The visual glide path of the VASI provides safe obstruction clearance within plus or minus 10 degrees of the extended runway center line and to 4 nautical miles from the runway threshold. All right, moving right along. Our final topic, VFR on top. Back.
Next up is VFR on top. Did you know that it is possible to be on an IFR flight plan and yet have to follow the VFR rules as well? That's what can happen during VFR on top operations. In VFR on top, conditions are defined as operations in clear skies over a cloud deck that obscures the ground. Now, both IFR and VFR rules apply. If your VFR on top clearance is approved, you may fly any appropriate VFR altitude following the VFR altitude rules at or above the MEA and up to 18,000 feet. It is the pilot's responsibility to see and avoid other aircraft. Now, ATC may provide traffic information on other IFR or VFR aircraft to pilots operating VFR on top, but when in VMC, IFR and VFR rules both apply.
Well, now as a corporate pilot, you probably find yourself on top of the clouds more often than in them. Mm-hmm. How and when do you actually decide to file VFR on top?
Well, VFR on top is a concept that really as a corporate pilot you never use. And the reason you never use it is you fly up in the flight levels, where of course an IFR flight plan is absolutely required. And we fly up there not only because we can, but because we can save a lot more fuel up at 37 or 45,000 feet than we can burning along at 15,000 or 17,000 feet. Right. Simply an exercise in how much air and how much fuel do you have, and how thick is the air.
Remember, VFR on top is still an IFR clearance. Let's take a look at a scenario. You are flying on an IFR flight plan at 17,000 feet. You experience turbulence, so you decide to ask ATC for a clearance to 19,000 feet to attempt finding smooth air. Can you remain on a VFR on top clearance? No, you cannot, because 19,000 feet is Class A airspace, and a VFR on top clearance is only valid below 18,000 feet. Now, as far as altitude reporting, in all cases, pilots advise ATC prior to any altitude changes to ensure the exchange of accurate traffic information.
Let's take time now for a question on our final topic for this lesson. Which ATC clearance should instrument-rated pilots request in order to climb through a cloud layer or an area of reduced visibility and then continue the flight VFR? A, B, or C? The correct answer here, A, to VFR on top. Pilots desiring to climb through a cloud, haze, smoke, or other meteorological formation and then either cancel their IFR flight plan or operate VFR on top may request a climb to VFR on top. That does it for Lesson 6. Lesson number 7, en route procedures, coming right up.